Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with the June 9th edition of the PMI Western Idaho Chapter Lunch and Learn. So welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Looks like we have about 20 people on so far, 21. We'll have a few others join in the next few minutes. So I'm Brian Russell. I'm the coordinator for the PMI's Western Idaho Chapter Lunch and Learn sessions. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started today with our event. A reminder that Lunch and Learns for July and August, we don't schedule any of Lunch and Learns for the next 2 months. So this will be the last one until September. So after today, looking forward to seeing everybody come September. A reminder that coming up later this month is on June 23rd is our annual meeting, as well as our speaking event. We have Tim Cormier, who will be talking with us about ProSci and change management. So if you haven't registered for that, go ahead and visit the chapter website, look for events, and then you can register yourself for the June 23rd event. For today's meeting, just a reminder, on the right-hand side of your screen in the Hopin application, we're going to be in the session. So you'll see, if you expand the menu on the right-hand side, we'll be in the session, and rather than the event portion of the program. So within that session, Tiffany has lined up for us a few polls that she wants to take during her presentation, but also use the Q&A for any questions you might have for Tiffany as she presents out on her content. And then during the next hour, we'll take breaks during the presentation and look at the Q&A and have a chance for Tiffany to respond to any questions you might have. So yes, use the Q&A under the session logo, not the event logo. I think that is about it. Just again, for that June 23rd event, the first half hour from 6 to 6:30 is the annual chapter membership meeting. And then from 6:30 to 7:30, Tim will be presenting out on change management. So today's Lunch and Learn. So let me quickly introduce Tiffany. So Tiffany's going to be talking about risky people, recognizing the human risk to your projects. Tiffany is a change manager. Now, let's see, what did I do? I lost that. So Tiffany's a business partner change management with the St. Luke's Health System, and she's going to be presenting out on the change management. Let me just check one other thing here. Bear with me. By the way, I do have a grandson in the house today, so if you hear any baby noises, it is my grandson. If you hear any of that in the background, I apologize in advance, but it is my grandson that you might hear laugh or carry on once in a while. So as I mentioned, Tiffany Fite is a business partner change management at St. Luke's Health System. While project managers prepare a solution for an organization, Tiffany helps prepare the organization for the solution. Tiffany has successfully partnered with project managers in multiple industries and enjoys building change capability with project managers and leaders. When not at her role at St. Luke's, Tiffany enjoys traveling anywhere and everywhere with her teen sons and husband. So Tiffany, let me join the team in welcoming you to Lunch and Learn, and hearing about change management and risky people.
Thanks so much, Brian, and thanks, Cheryl, for all of the support, technological and moral support. It's been a while since I've presented virtually to a group that I really don't have a clear sense of who's out there, and I can't see any faces. And when I say it's been a while, as in never. So it's fun to see in the chat, because I know that there are some folks I know out there. So nice to see you again, since I can't see your faces. But as Brian said, I am a business partner change management at St. Luke's. I've been here just since October and really enjoying working in the healthcare industry. It's been fantastic to just really learn and feel connected to the work, because we've all been patients. We've all had family members that have been patients, and so it's work that's very close to my heart. So, but change management is what I do day to day. And as Brian said, I've done this work in a few different industries now. Right now, it's in healthcare, and before that, I was in semiconductor with Micron, and before that was with Progressive Insurance, so auto insurance. And the thing with change management is, no matter the industry, the same principles apply. And in all three of those industries, I was able to work on some risk management from a change perspective. So it was really fun when I arrived at St. Luke's last October. St. Luke's is in the process of building change management capability through the organization and through the particular area I work in. And so there was an opportunity for us to look at the existing risk workshops, which were fantastic, here at St. Luke's, and add an element of people and people risk, because it has to go together. So as Brian said, this time together will be somewhat interactive, and that I'll have a few poll questions and opportunities for you to participate via the Q&A function. I won't have visibility to that, but Brian's going to help share with me what he's seeing and hearing, and also you can certainly plop questions into that Q&A section. I'll stop periodically so Brian can share any questions that have come up. And then I'm going to start broadly and share my thoughts as a change manager on risk and risk workshops and a risk culture. Then I will funnel down to a little bit more tactical of how we are at St. Luke's conducting these risk and change management workshops. So some will be kind of theory and conceptual, and some will be a little bit more tactical. But ultimately, I hope that you'll find something that resonates with you, since you're investing your lunch hour with us. And keeping in mind that I'm sharing my perspective here as a change manager. Many of you work with change managers on projects, and/or you are incorporating change management tools, techniques, and principles as project managers. So just know that this is my full-time role, and I recognize that many of you do change management on kind of a part-time basis or are incorporating it. But I also understand change management principles are really being embedded into PMI and the project management capabilities as well. So here we go. At the risk of aging myself, just to share that a former CEO at a company I worked for said this about integrity and managing risk. He said, "If it can put us on an episode of 60 Minutes, it's probably a risk we should know about." So that was a very sticky message, if you will. He would say that to the entire organization and say, you need to elevate any risks. Use that as your litmus test. So our first opportunity to share in the Q&A, if you could write a few risks that could get your company or organization, or any company or organization, onto an investigative episode of 60 Minutes. What are a few of the things that could happen that could get a company there? All right, Brian, do we have anything to share there?
Yeah, so we have bribery, which got you in 60 minutes, having a data breach, Those are the only two responses so far.
Okay, sounds good. Well, both huge and both very important, and bribery specifically is a people risk. So thank you, and if anything else comes to mind, feel free to plug it in there in that Q&A. So this is just a few of the things that you may be able to take away from our time together. Why people are a critical consideration in building an effective risk culture. So that goes beyond the workshops that we're going to talk about. And then we all want project adoption, right? Project managers, change managers, that's what we're here for. So by bringing awareness to people risks, we strengthen the opportunity for adoption. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on how to leverage sponsors and committed executives to elevate people risk and really all of the risks. All right, and then this is just kind of the cadence of how we're going to go about it. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what are we doing, why are we doing this now, how are we doing this, and what are some of the benefits. And I'm not an instructional designer, so my slides are probably super ugly. So Brian said this because I think I put this in my bio. I think ProSci has started talking about project management and change management in this way, and I love it. Project management prepares the solution for the organization. Change management prepares the organization for the solution. And so for our purpose today, the organization I'm talking about is people who must do or know something different for the solution to be successful. Okay? So at St. Luke's, what are we doing? We have now what we call a risk and change management workshop. And I described a little bit of this a few minutes ago, but we already had existing project risk workshops, which were going very well and a very important part of the project life cycle here. Last fall, St. Luke's started investing in change management as an important practice here to help strengthen that adoption. And so as we are building change management capability, not only as a small change management communications team, but through the work we do on projects and throughout the organization, we noticed the overlap and that we really should be talking about risks and change management together. So for about 2 months now, we've combined this workshop. And again, I'll tell you a little bit more about what that tactically looks like after we go through some more theory and concepts. But this is why we're doing this work. And so far, we've gotten a really good response. And it's a win-win in that the project risk workshops are kind of bolstered by adding a different dimension of people. And then building change management capability, it's certainly a fantastic way for us to build change capability because all of the people who would attend our risk workshops are seeing and hearing people risks regularly. So that will become more normal and top of mind for everyone. Okay, first chance for a poll, and we have 2 polls here. So if you could go to the poll section. And number 1, I'm just curious, do you incorporate people risks into your risk registers today? And you'll have the opportunity to say yes, no, you don't know, or we don't use risk registers. This is just to give me a sense of what folks are doing out there.
Yeah, so attendees, if you would expand that right menu, click on polls, and this is answering the first question, the first poll questions. Just answer the first poll right now. We'll get to the other 2 later on in the presentation. Tiffany, we're getting a few votes in, so let me give it another few seconds. So we've had 59% of the audience say yes.
Fantastic. Good.
About 14% said no, and the remaining are not sure.
Okay, great. So now is the opportunity to hit poll number 2. Do you currently conduct risk workshops? Yes, no, not sure, or you don't conduct risk workshops. And then we'll do poll number 3 a little bit later, and you'll want to hold off on that because you may want the context. So poll number 2.
All right, we have a few votes coming in. Do you currently conduct risk workshops? Choose one. Okay, so we have yes, Tiffany, yes, 22%, no, 56%, and the remainder are not sure.
Okay. Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing the poll results for me and for those who participated. So that's really interesting. So 59% of those who responded to the poll are currently including people risks on the risk registers. Awesome. But yet, out of this group, only 22% are currently conducting risk workshops. So that is an interesting finding to me. So thank you for that. That just helps give me a sense of where everyone is with this topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about the why. Why would we incorporate people risks into the risk register and the risk workshops? So all of you in your roles probably recognize this so far, but this is really important to remember that people are an organization's biggest asset and can be the biggest risk, and we need to take that seriously. And when we think of project adoption and solution adoption, when there is a human factor involved of someone needing to know or do something different, and keeping in mind their day-to-day of the choices and circumstances and impulses that a human has during the workday, typically, let alone what else is coming at them, outside of the workday that they're bringing in with them, their behaviors can either adopt your solution or introduce it to risks. And a lot of that is how we mitigate that and how we bring them along. But it's a fact that we have to really come to terms with. And then none of those risks can be eliminated, but when we can anticipate them and we can mitigate them with proper measures in place. So, all right, so talk about why now. So this is just about kind of up-leveling again to what's an effective risk culture. So think of your organization as we talk about each of these, and I'm going to stay on this slide for a few minutes. So an effective risk culture. The most effective risk organizations can respond quickly and effectively to risk because they have fostered a culture that acknowledges risks for what they are, for better or for worse. They've encouraged transparency, making early signs of unexpected events more visible, and they've created processes and controls to understand and act on them. So 2 of those processes and controls are risk registers and risk workshops, but there are many others. I was just reading an article, I think on Harvard Business Review yesterday, about a Swiss company that is making, like, every employee is a risk manager. There's an app on their phone that they can report some sort of risk anonymously or not at any moment. So there are different ways to build a risk culture. So acknowledging risk takes a certain confidence and humility among leaders to acknowledge risks. Openly discussing them internally requires that everyone works through issues that could lead to project failure, crisis, embarrassment, or loss. Those are heavy-hitting words, but they're reality. The stance a strong risk culture takes is, if we see it, identify it, and size it, then even if it's horrible, we'll be able to manage it. Where risks cannot be sized, they are at least discussed in qualitative terms. So that is, I think, that's an aspirational goal for many organizations, I recognize, but it makes sense that we try to get there. So then what are the traits of a weak risk culture? They're reactive. Many would rather ignore undesirable behaviors because they don't know how to manage them, and because managing them would demand time and might affect their cost base or project scope or project budget. This organization's stance is, here's one example, let's wait until we really need to deal with these unpleasant things because they're anomalies that may turn out to be nothing at all. You all probably cringed a little bit if 59% of you are including people risks on your risk registers, and I'm sure almost everybody on this call has kept a risk register no matter what. So the second thing here, encouraging transparency. Leaders who are confident that their organizational policies and controls can handle and even benefit from openness about risk are more likely to share the kinds of information that signal risk events and allow institutions to resolve emerging issues long before they become a crisis. This means they spot a risk issue developing and mobilize the organization to analyze and remedy it. Now, the risk workshop that I'm going to share that we're doing at St. Luke's is, we recommend it to happen in a very specific place in our project life cycle, but anytime an effective risk culture should be able to quickly mobilize groups to have those discussions at any time. And then the opposite of transparency is denial and failure. Ensuring respect for risk. Too few controls can be problematic, but too many also introduce people risk. For example, if too many guidelines and controls are put in place, usually under the best of intentions, employees may see these as impractical and therefore circumvent them. And the reason that's problematic at a culture level is because it's detrimental to your project in the short term if they're circumventing the number of controls and rules. But it also creates a culture where all guidelines are eventually or could be eventually disregarded. So one project, one people risk that's ignored, could end up leading to some pretty big cultural implications. But also one people risk that's ignored could end up in project failure as well. So leaders need to continuously monitor related trends and behaviors, even with the right number of controls in place. Organizations often unconsciously celebrate a beat the system mindset, rewarding people for speed rather than accuracy or other metrics instead of quality. I worked in a group once that very much employees were rewarded for what we call diving catches instead of thoughtful, planned processes. So building an effective risk culture also finds consensus on culture. For example, a quote, "We will always understand the people implications of the risk decisions we make." Okay, so that could be a guiding principle in an organization. And then vigilance, consistency, and attention. So if these things aren't happening in your organization today, I highly recommend you help influence creating a more effective risk culture. These things don't happen overnight. And typically, as with many cultural changes, they'll start at the top down. So any opportunity you have to influence that, the better for your project, but also for the overall organization and the health of the organization. Okay. Brian, do we have any questions that have come in for me?
As a reminder to the team, use the session Q&A to document any questions, and I'll relay them to Tiffany. But Tiffany, a question for you that comes to mind as you're talking about this. So from a project manager perspective, talk about how St. Luke's and the project management team at St. Luke's ensures that the risks, that people risks like we're talking about today, are regularly reviewed. What does that cadence look like? And just frankly, how do you get leadership? What approach are you taking to get leadership to ensure they're that they're reviewing and making an effort to understand the people risk as well? Kind of back to that culture piece.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as we are building change capability at St. Luke's, we have a toolkit of change management tools and activities that are done at different points in the project lifecycle. And if those tools and activities are being done throughout the project lifecycle, whether by a change manager like myself or by many of our talented project managers that don't have the benefit of a change manager assisting them, they are regularly communicating with the sponsors, which are often executive level or people with high influence and commitment to the project at hand. And if those tools and activities are being done, then those conversations are regularly happening. So then when it comes time for us to do the risk workshop, where we are combining the risk and change management, there are a few of those tools and activities that we leverage in that session that I'll talk about in a few minutes to validate with the group there. And often the risk workshop may be an expanded group beyond your core team. And so now more people are engaged in that conversation. And another key piece, I think, for us is when we have the executives, meaning the executive sponsor or the highest level executive possible, presenting and talking about those things, often with coaching from myself or a project manager, then people will listen differently. So it's a combination of a commitment to regular tools and activities to understand the people impacts to the project and therefore uncover the risks, and leveraging the right people in the organization to talk about those things. So those are the two things I would say at this point, Brian.
Okay, thank you. And then you had talked about sizing risk, and maybe you're going to talk about this later. But what's the approach at St. Luke's to size, or when I hear sizing, I think you're putting some sort of score on the risk.
Sure.
Will you talk about that?
Sure. I will briefly touch on it because that is one of the 3 change tools and activities that we do validate and leverage in this risk workshop. It's also something that on many of our highest impact projects, meaning the capital investment, the people impacted, the clinical nature of the changes, our change sizing tool is also something we share with our governance groups, so they have visibility to that as well. So I will show you the output of our current change sizing tool in just a moment, but basically what it is we are assessing, I think it's 18 points on the level of readiness for the organization and the magnitude of change, which includes the number of locations or the number of people impacted, whether the organization that's impacted is change ready or are they change saturated? How have change management and project risks been managed before? Good, bad, or whatever. And so all of these things go into the change sizing tool to help assess the risk. It is not scientific in any sense. It is intended to be directional and to give everyone a sense of what we're dealing with here. So I'll show you the output of that in just a moment.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So here we're going to spend a few moments on what are some examples of people risks. I think all of you probably know some of the basics of what people risks are. I mean, just simply, if someone is required, if the solution we're developing for the problem that we're trying to solve is a technological change, there's a lot that goes into needing to understand what's the impact of that technological change on people. And if we don't do it well, then sometimes there will be workarounds, sometimes there will be resistance to the technology to where people stop using it altogether, if that's even an option. So those are some of the more common things. But on some projects, and the work I do here at St. Luke's is on some of our what we call transformational initiatives. So these are the bigger programs, the bigger, more strategic, long-term programs with many projects underneath. So some of those things are going to involve things like you see here, composition of the impacted groups. We may need to hire certain people for the solution. One program and project I've worked on here at St. Luke's so far, we've needed to hire a new clinical role. So making sure that we have, a risk is that we hire the wrong role for us, and we've never hired for it before. So that is a risk. Occasionally, programs and projects will cause attrition, either on purpose or as a result of the change that we're introducing. Some people just may choose to not be part of it any longer and leave the organization. So that's always a risk. And then digital readiness, understanding the impact of technology on roles and skills. Sometimes what we think is a very simple technological change, and in our case at St. Luke's, it could be a handheld device that someone now needs to simply go to a different screen to do something. I said simply, but it's not simple at all, because their habits, are that they are on this screen. This is what they do. And people, as humans, all of us want ease and comfort knowing that we can be successful with something, and we want to not have to think about it. So we ingrain habits. So when we are needing to change someone's habit, what seems as a very simple thing, oh, you do the same thing, it's just on a different screen, is not a simple change at all. I mean, it's simplistic, but it's not simple for those who are needing to actually make the change. So,
and Tiffany, Dawn comments too that when a key resource is overcommitted as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great addition. Great addition. And so then we also have the behavioral, disengagement affecting productivity and morale. I think this past year has really heightened this in so many ways. And during this pandemic, I've had the opportunity to work in two separate organizations, at Micron and then now at St. Luke's. And so I got to see it in two very different ways, how it affected productivity and morale. So when we're introducing change, that's on top of some who are coming to work already disengaged for various reasons. So that will be a risk in our solution being successful. Safety issues, leadership alignment. This is a big one that I've seen at all three organizations I've worked in change management. And in one case, there was an effort at the program and project level to elevate this very risk, a leadership alignment risk. And it was really because the leader involved didn't necessarily have the skill set we needed to align other leaders in the organization, and therefore was looking to almost kind of sanitize the risk that we were elevating to where it became a risk we didn't even recognize anymore and kind of pointless for us to even elevate it. It was a painful process, but actually what it ended up, because we kept with it, it ended up very positively in that there was an executive sponsor change on this project, which was very much needed, because as you all know, executive sponsors can really help make the solution fantastic for your organization, or it can be tough if they're not very engaged or have the right skill set for various reasons. So leadership alignment and having the right people in place who can align all leaders vertically and horizontally is a huge risk, but also a huge boon to your project if you have it and when you have it. And then flawed incentives. So incentives that maybe like in the first Q&A I asked about what could end you up on 60 Minutes, somebody said bribery. There may be an incentive that you're building into your solution that actually introduces people risks. So it's important to look at those incentives from all angles and anticipate what some of those risks might be. Hopefully no one that's on this call today or in the roles that we are today is going to deal with something like bribery as a risk on your project, but it's certainly taken down individuals and taken down companies. So it's important to just look at, when we're developing incentives as part of our project solution, to think through, where could this actually get off the rails. So here's when, if you could hop back over to the poll tab, the last poll for you today is, in your experience, which of these have you seen the most negatively impact a project solution? Can't remember if that's exactly how we have the question worded, but
Yeah.
Hiring, attrition, yeah, which one?
Yeah,
and if you have an other, certainly write it in Q&A as well. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, and so for the attendees, just mark one, and the question does say mark all that apply, but just choose your top one. Which of these have you seen negatively impact a project solution? And I'm sure with many of us, we could have examples of all of them.
Right.
And we have some votes coming in. By the way, Tiffany, we have 30 people on this session.
Fantastic.
So we had a good turnout today.
Welcome, 30 people.
All right, so the votes so far look like, yeah, we still have a couple more coming in. Almost half, about 48% leadership alignment.
Wow.
Followed by 26% at attrition. Now leadership alignment is at 50%. Then we have a couple of votes for digital readiness, for digital engagement, a vote for hiring, and then a vote for other, which I didn't see anything in chat on what the other was.
Wow.
Brian, this is Cheryl. It's actually Q&A.
Oh, it's in Q&A. Okay, let me look into there. Flawed incentives, i.e. conflicting MBOs. From Dawn mentioned that.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
It looks like, half of the votes came in under leadership alignment, and that would be my experience as well.
That's really high. Yes, definitely one of the biggest challenges, and sometimes one of the ones that takes a lot of time, but it's worth the investment of time, because as many of you probably understand and know, but in my change management training, we hear how people want to, just as a very simple example, how people want to hear messages. They want to hear from only two people about messages about your change. They want to hear from the highest level executive possible and their own supervisor. That's it. They don't want to hear from me. They don't want to hear from any of you, no offense. They want to hear from one of those two people. The highest level business executive is the one who's sharing business messages about a solution and about why we're doing this work. Why are we doing this work now? And how does it fit into the overall organizational strategy? People want to hear from their supervisor. How does this affect me? How are you going to help support me through this? So if we do not have leadership alignment, then one, at the executive level, people are not going to understand the why and the why now, the what's changing why and the why now. And that's a risk. if supervisors, and when you think of the number of supervisors you have in your organization and the level that they should ideally be involved with the change, if you have any misalignment there, that can be really damaging, because people will naturally follow their supervisor or manager's lead, both in the reaction to the change and the solution, to how should we react and respond to this. So leadership alignment is a huge investment of time, and it's one that pays dividends. But I recognize it's a huge investment and looks like the biggest risk, at least for this group. Thank you for that. Okay, now I know there were some questions about how, so let me share a little bit about how we are doing this work. So I'm going to share three things, kind of the timing of, I'm going to share the timing of what we are doing at St. Luke's, just as a general guideline for us, how we prepare, and then what the actual risk workshop session looks like. So the timing you see there, what we do here at St. Luke's is as we're entering the initiation and planning phase. That may look different with your project structure, but that's what we're doing. And I'll show you a slide of what that looks like. Preparation, we make sure that known people-related risks are already on the risk register. And it sounds like most of you are doing that today, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. But going back to my response to the question Brian shared, when we are following good, sound project and change management tools and activities throughout the life of the project, many of those risks should be known, and we just have to recognize them as people risks to then transfer to the risk register. We typically will have a prep meeting with the project team, and we have an operational guide of kind of walking people through what that looks like and what that actual session will look like. And this was something that was already existing when I joined St. Luke's. So all I've done is incorporate a few things from a change management perspective. So some of the language and some of the tools and information that we're collecting. And then we send a PreWork Prep flyer, which I have some print screens of that I'll share with you. And then in the session itself, we ask the executives or executive sponsors or the highest level executives to share two tools that we currently use, and I'll show you print screens of these as well. A change need assessment, which is essentially just outlining the what's changing, the why now, what is not changing, and what are the organizational benefits to the change. Then our project manager, typically in this session, let me back up. So change need assessment, the change sizing, this is the one I referred to briefly before. It's assessing changes on the size of readiness and magnitude. And then you're also able, based on the inputs, to identify what are the things you rated lower that are pushing it into maybe a higher risk quadrant. So I'll just be showing you the quadrant and a few example risks. But having the executive sponsor share that, again, with typically in a risk workshop, it may be an expanded group over the core team and key people in the organization, helps embed the change principles into our daily work and life. And then we will typically have the project manager or change manager validate our group impact analysis. Some people call this the stakeholder analysis, basically where we're just assessing what groups of people are impacted by this change. How are they impacted? We assess them at a high, medium, and low. And what is their current state? What's the future state we're expecting of them? What's the gap? And what are we planning to do to mitigate that gap? So throughout the risk workshop, as many different risks, people related or not, are being discussed, we can refine all of these tools. We can refine the risk register. We can refine the group impact analysis based on what we're hearing. So it's just an opportunity to show the work that we're doing, how we're managing those impacts, what our plans are, and make adjustments and validate it with this important group. When I attend these risk and change workshops, I also, as people are going through the risk register, I'm also listening for additional people risks that we may not have on the risk register yet. And I'll show you in just a moment a slide that I did in one session where I was just documenting words I heard that we could refer back to help, again, build that change muscle and help people identify things as people risks. Okay? And then we add new risks based on the conversations we're having. Okay, so here's some examples. I know this is an eye chart. So my only point here, this is St. Luke's project process. We conduct the risk workshop right here. So we've done a lot of ideation, alignment, evaluation. We have the value proposition. We've been given approval to go. We conduct a risk workshop as we're pulling together our implementation plan. Okay? But as we mentioned before, I think risks should be elevated at any time, every time, and feel free, if it makes sense, to pull together a workshop wherever it makes sense for you. That's what we do. Here is a PreWork Prep flyer, and I know you can't read this, I'm sure. This was also an existing tool. I just wanted to share some things I added to bring the people risk into the PreWork Prep flyer. So I highlighted those. So on the overview, I'm just going to read this top paragraph for you. The Risk and Change Management Workshop will seek to facilitate a review of current risk events, change management activities, and survey the project team for additional items. This risk workshop will focus on all of these things, and then we added validate the change need, change sizing, and impacted groups. We define for them what is a risk event on this pre-work flyer. Risk is an uncertain event that poses a positive or negative effect on a project or company. It can impact adoption, time, cost, scope, quality, or reputation. So here in this middle, typical risk events can impact all of these things: safety, schedule, cost, productivity, reputation, compliance, and adoption. We added. We have the focus areas. And this was over 2 pages. That's why compliance and adoption ended up on the second page. That's why the white gap here. But we added a focus area is adoption. What is the magnitude and organizational readiness for this change, and what groups are impacted by this change? Okay. And then overall, we share what are the benefits of doing this risk workshop? Why should people participate? Minimize surprises, support communications, documentation, lessons learned, and then I added to the end here, realize people-dependent adoption. Okay. So all of that is to prepare people for the workshop, but it's also embedding the language, so it becomes more normal. Here's, yeah.
A question on that prior slide. So a question, so the risk workshop is really a risk register review and a risk mitigation plan review?
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
Fair statement.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Dawn.
And here's an example of how we split our time. And this is current, and I don't know if we'll always do it this way, but this is somewhat how we structure it today. Objectives, session overview, we go through the fundamentals, identify project risks. This is where we spend time going through the risk register. And then we go through a change management portion where sometimes, depending on the audience, I will share, if I'm in there, I'll share a little bit about what are we even talking about when we talk about change management, you know, the people dependent ROI for your project. But this is also where we will share those and validate those 3 tools I mentioned. But this is flexible. We go by program or project focus of what we bring into this. And then often that's where we will also add risks to the risk register that were people dependent, that were identified here. And also that conversation about change management has also been known to generate additional conversation and additional risks by themselves, because now that when people start thinking about these in this context, they'll add things to the risk register. This is the assess change need that we use. I mentioned the what's changing, why now, what's not changing, what are the benefits. This is completed usually at the core team and already validated with that group. But this is important for us to have the executive sponsor, when possible, review this with the group. And this is a tool that it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's specifically risk related, but the reason we do this is it kind of helps people think again, broadly of what are we trying to accomplish here? And it gets people thinking from a people perspective and what people need to know and potentially what additional risks may need to be added. This is, again, just the output of our current change sizing tool. As I mentioned, I think 18 line items that we're assessing on, a 3-point scale. And we are looking at the overall readiness of the organization and the overall magnitude of the change itself. So this particular example, based on how we responded, ended up in the high-risk quadrant. This is a tool, again, I mentioned that we bring to this risk workshop, just again, a nice visual to show people we need to really take this seriously from a people perspective, overall project perspective, of course, but from a people perspective. And we also use this in many of our trips to our governance committees. So they also have an assessment and appreciation for the size of the change. And then these 5 bullets on the right here are things that came up from those line items that we would identify and call out why it landed in the high-risk quadrant were based on these drivers. Role and skill changes, very disruptive change to our clinical staff in particular. We expect high resistance, leadership alignment and public commitment, which we talked about, and change saturation. This is usually a big conversation starter. So if you don't currently have a change sizing tool, recommend it's a good addition to your toolkit. And then this, I'm not expecting you at all to be able to see any of this, but this is where we're just validating the impact analysis. The impacted groups, as I mentioned, we assess their current state, future state, gap, and mitigation efforts. And we assess who is the group, how many, typically we'll add how many team members are impacted, and then give an assessment of whether they are impacted high, medium, or low. And then we share all of the current, future, and what the gap is. And we just validate that with this group. And this is often where we may make some subtle changes in the risk workshop based on what we had heard in that risk workshop. And then I mentioned that in one risk workshop that I participated in, I was listening as they went through their entire risk registry. We hadn't gotten to the change management piece of things yet. But as the group and as they were discussing the risks on the risk register, these are some key words I heard. And as a change practitioner, these are words that ring my bell. These are words that in every core team meeting or any project meeting I'm sitting in on, I'm listening for words like this, because these are the things that indicate people risk. And the people who are saying these words may not recognize it as a true people risk. So it's up to me to kind of help bring that back and say, hey, when you were talking about XYZ change, you said this is going to potentially impact compensation, and it was a system change. Well, there's a huge people impact to that, of course. Or this group should be fairly amenable to this change. Oh, let's talk about that. Tell me more. What makes you say that? And let's validate that. And it may not end up on a risk register because, yes, this is a friendly change to that group. But anyway, this is just an example of some keywords I heard during a risk register review in that risk workshop that I was able to pull back. Good conversation starter. What questions, any other questions that have come in, Brian? Or comments?
Jan makes a comment back on the last poll that 50% of us suggested that the leadership of project efforts is our largest risk. I thought that was an interesting observation.
Yeah, for sure. And one that takes a lot of time to mitigate, but it's well worth the investment. For sure. I would say that's probably the most common I've ever experienced as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No other questions?
Okay.
And from a time check, we have about 5 minutes.
Great. Well, we are wrapping it up. So what is our end goal here at St. Luke's? This is not a very pretty Venn diagram, but I just wanted to show a contrast to the first one I showed. As we're building change capability, I'm docking into the existing risk workshops, but as through time, and I don't know how much time it's going to take, but as we are building change management capability here at St. Luke's, there's the overlap is going to be much greater because it's going to be embedded in our processes. So truly, a risk workshop should just naturally over time include people risk and will not need to be, we won't necessarily call out risk and change management workshop. It's our risk workshop, and that's what we're doing, and we're talking about those things. It's aspirational for me at this point, but I believe that having seen change capability and been part of change capability building at 2 prior organizations, I know it can happen as well, at least in some pockets of the organization. So I think that is our end goal, is just that over time, we don't have to call out change management as a separate thing. It is a risk. People risks are as important as other risks because they can certainly sink or swim your project. All right, well, that was it for me. I welcome any additional questions or comments, or we can wrap it up.
All right, thank you, Tiffany. There's no other questions. So thank you so much. This was really great content. A reminder for those attending that we will be sending out the recording. Tiffany's going to be providing us a PDF of her content, so you have that to refer to. And again, for those that joined a little bit late, we will not have lunch and learns during July and August, and hope to see everybody again in September.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.